The courtroom was silent as Judge Theodore Grayson leaned back in his chair, a smug smile spreading across his face. His voice, dripping with condescension, echoed through the room. "Mr. Carter, are you aware of where you are?" he asked, addressing a teenage boy with messy hair, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans. His sneakers squeaked slightly as he shifted uncomfortably on the polished floor. "This is a court of law, not some high school debate team." Laughter rippled across the courtroom. The attorneys seated behind their desks exchanged amused glances. The boy stood alone at the defense table, holding a stack of papers that seemed almost too heavy for his small frame. His cheeks flushed, but his eyes stayed steady, locked on the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm despite the jeers. "I'm here to..." Judge Grayson cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Save it. This court doesn't have time for juvenile antics. I don't even know why this nonsense was allowed." The boy raised his chin, his voice firm. "If you would let me speak, Your Honor, you might find it worth your time." The courtroom gasped. The audacity of a teenager speaking to a judge like that was unheard of. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his smirk deepening into a scowl. "Well, by all means," he said mockingly. "Enlighten us all." The boy took a deep breath, adjusted the papers in his hand, and began. What happened next left the courtroom in stunned silence. As he spoke, delivering a seamless argument citing legal precedents, constitutional clauses, and court procedures, it became clear that he wasn't just any teenager. He was knowledgeable, confident, and astonishingly correct. The attorneys who had been laughing moments earlier were now furiously scribbling notes. Judge Grayson's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. "Who are you?" he finally blurted out, leaning forward in his seat. His voice no longer carried mockery, but genuine bewilderment. The boy stopped, met his gaze, and smiled slightly. "I'm Ethan Carter," he said, "and I'm here to defend my client." The room erupted into chaos. Questions flew from every direction. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but his own composure was clearly shaken. How could a teenager hold the courtroom captive with such authority? Who had allowed this? What was going on? And that's when Ethan's calm smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. The courtroom quieted again, all eyes on him. What was he about to reveal? 2 weeks earlier, Ethan Carter sat in his small bedroom, surrounded by law books and legal pads. The books weren't his, they belonged to his older sister, Jessica, who had been studying to pass the bar exam. But Jessica wasn't around anymore, and Ethan had made it his mission to learn everything she had. His best friend Liam had called him crazy. "What are you even doing?" Liam asked one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Ethan's bed, munching on a bag of chips. "You're 16. You're not a lawyer." Ethan's fingers paused over his notebook, where he had been writing out case summaries. He looked up at Liam, his expression serious. "I don't care what people think. I have to do this." "But why?" Liam pressed, his voice softening. "Why can't you just let it go?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he flipped through one of Jessica's old textbooks, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Finally," he said, "because someone has to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, and Jessica believed I could do it." Liam didn't argue after that. Instead, he watched as his best friend poured himself into studying, preparing for something that seemed impossible. What Ethan didn't tell Liam What he didn't tell anyone was that his obsession with the law wasn't just about helping others. It was about proving something to himself. After Jessica's disappearance, people had treated him like a fragile child. Teachers, neighbors, even his own parents had started tiptoeing around him, as if one wrong word might break him. But he wasn't fragile, and he wasn't a child. He was smart, he was determined, and he was going to show everyone that he could make a difference. Back in the courtroom, Ethan's composure had returned, but the atmosphere was tense. Judge Grayson, still visibly flustered, leaned back in his chair and studied him closely. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "you're telling me you're representing the defendant?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "And where exactly did you study law?" the judge asked, his tone skeptical but no longer mocking. "I didn't go to law school, if that's what you're asking," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But I've spent the last year studying legal texts and court procedures. I've read every case related to this matter, and I believe I'm qualified to represent my client." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You believe you're qualified? That's not how this works." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then let me prove it." The courtroom was silent. Everyone waited to see what the judge would do next. Judge Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door at the back of the courtroom swung open. A tall man in a crisp suit strode in. "Your Honor," the man said, his deep voice carrying across the room, "I believe I can shed some light on this situation." Ethan turned to look at him, his confident expression finally slipping into one of uncertainty. Who was this man? And what did he want? The tall man's presence commanded attention. He walked with an air of authority, his briefcase swinging lightly in his hand. His sharp gray suit and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to Ethan's simple outfit. The courtroom's focus shifted entirely to him, the murmurs growing louder as people speculated who he was and why he was there. "Excuse me, sir," Judge Grayson said, his tone regaining its authority. "Who are you and what business do you have interrupting my courtroom?" The man stopped just before the bench, placing his briefcase gently on the table. He turned to face the judge and gave a respectful nod. "My apologies, Your Honor. My name is Daniel Hayes, and I'm here as a representative of the Bar Association." The courtroom buzzed with surprise. Ethan's heart raced as he stared at the man, trying to figure out his intentions. Why would someone from the Bar Association be here? Was this about him? His grip on the stack of papers tightened. Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow. "The Bar Association, what interest do they have in this case?" Mr. Hayes opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, flipping through a few pages before responding. "It's not the case itself, Your Honor. It's the matter of representation." He glanced briefly at Ethan before continuing. "We received an anonymous tip about an unlicensed individual attempting to represent a client in court. Naturally, this is a matter we take very seriously." The air in the room felt heavy. Ethan's stomach dropped. He had worked tirelessly for this moment, and now it felt like everything was about to unravel. Ethan Carter's heart pounded as the weight of Daniel Hayes's words settled over the courtroom. The murmurs around him grew louder. Judges, lawyers, and onlookers, all whispering in disbelief. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. Now, he was being questioned as an imposter, someone who had no right to stand in a courtroom. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel once, his voice sharp. "Order in the court." The murmurs died down, but the tension in the air only thickened. Ethan clenched his fists, willing himself to stay composed. Mr. Hayes, Judge Grayson said, leaning forward. You claim this young man was reported for practicing law without a license. Yes, Your Honor, Hayes replied, his voice professional but firm. And as I'm sure you're aware, this is a serious matter. Eason swallowed hard, but he didn't look away. He had come too far to back down now. Taking a deep breath, he steadied his voice. Your Honor, he said, looking directly at the judge. I understand the legal implications of what I'm doing, but my client, Mr. Peterson, has no one else. He was appointed an overworked public defender who didn't even review the evidence properly. If I hadn't stepped in, he would have been railroaded into a conviction for something he didn't do. Judge Grayson's eyes narrowed. And you believe that justifies breaking the law? I believe it justifies fighting for justice. Eason shot back. Isn't that what this court is supposed to stand for? A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the courtroom. Even some of the lawyers who had laughed at Eason earlier were now watching him with a mix of curiosity and reluctant respect. Daniel Hayes sighed, flipping through the pages in his briefcase before looking back at Eason. Mr. Carter, passion is commendable, but the law exists for a reason. You can't simply walk into a courtroom and declare yourself a lawyer. Eason clenched his jaw. He had expected resistance, but this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Mr. Peterson. And deep down, it was about Jessica. He had promised himself he wouldn't let what happened to her happen to anyone else. I never declared myself a lawyer, Eason said, his voice unwavering. But I know the law. I know how to build a case, and I know that Mr. Peterson is innocent. Judge Grayson tapped his fingers against the bench, considering. For the first time, he didn't look dismissive. He looked intrigued. This court is at a crossroads, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Then he turned back to Daniel Hayes. Mr. Hayes, do you have grounds for immediate removal? Hayes hesitated. Technically, Your Honor, no official complaint has been filed against Mr. Carter. We received an anonymous tip, but unless someone challenges his standing right now, this is, he exhaled sharply, unconventional. Judge Grayson smirked. That's putting it mildly. Then he turned to Eason. Mr. Carter, you're not a lawyer, and yet here you stand, arguing like one. If I allow you to proceed, I expect nothing less than full adherence to legal standards. One mistake, one slip, and you're done. Eason straightened, determination burning in his eyes. Understood, Your Honor. The judge sighed. Then proceed. A collective gasp filled the room. Eason felt his stomach twist in a strange mix of relief and terror. He had won this round, but the real battle had just begun. That night, Eason sat in his room, the glow from his laptop screen illuminating stacks of law books, case files and coffee cups. His hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, but his mind was sharper than ever. A knock on the door made him jump. He turned, surprised to find Liam standing there, arms crossed. You're insane, Liam muttered. Eason smirked. You've mentioned that before. Liam stepped inside, closing the door behind him. No, I mean it. I saw the news. People are talking about you like you're some kind of genius. Others think you're a joke. And the Bar Association, they're not just going to let this slide. I know, Eason admitted. But I'm not doing this for fame, or to prove a point. Peterson is innocent. If I don't fight for him, who will? Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. And what happens when they come for you? When they decide you're too much of a threat? You think they'll just let some teenage kid make a mockery of the system? Eason leaned back, rubbing his temples. I don't know, he admitted, but I do know this. If I back down now, everything I've done means nothing. Liam studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Fine, but at least let me help. If you're going to war, you need reinforcements. Eason smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning in court, Ethan was prepared. He had spent all night reviewing the financial records. The next morning in court, Ethan was prepared. He had spent all night reviewing the financial records of Mr. Peterson's company, looking for anything that could prove he had been framed. Miss Steele, the prosecutor, wasn't going to make it easy. Your Honor, she said, striding confidently toward the bench. Yesterday was quite the spectacle, but I hope today we can return to actual legal proceedings. Judge Grayson smirked. That depends entirely on Mr. Carter. Ethan stepped forward. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce new evidence. Miss Steele raised an eyebrow. Oh, from what source exactly? Ethan held up a stack of documents, company financial records, ones that the prosecution conveniently left out. Steele's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carter. Then let's put it to the test, Ethan said, setting the papers down in front of the judge. Grayson scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Miss Steele. Care to explain why these weren't included in discovery? Miss Steele hesitated, and for the first time, Ethan saw something flicker in her expression: doubt, maybe even fear. This is irrelevant, she snapped. The case against Mr. Peterson is strong, and the court shouldn't be distracted by the antics of an unqualified teenager. Judge Grayson leaned forward. On the contrary, Miss Steele, if these records hold up, it means you've presented a misleading case. Steele's jaw clenched. Ethan turned to Mr. Peterson, who sat beside him, his eyes wide with hope. Just hold on, he whispered. We're getting there. Then, just as Ethan was about to continue, the courtroom doors burst open. A man stumbled in, disheveled, out of breath, clutching a USB drive. I have evidence, he shouted. Ethan's blood ran cold. Judge Grayson's expression darkened. Who are you, and why are you interrupting my courtroom? The man swallowed hard. My name is Henry Willis, he said, and I used to work for the company accusing Mr. Peterson. I have proof that the prosecution's evidence was manipulated. Gasps filled the room. Ethan exchanged a glance with Liam, who had been sitting in the gallery. This was it. This was the moment. Henry Willis stepped forward, placing the USB drive in the bailiff's hand. Play the footage, he said. Judge Grayson nodded. The screen in the courtroom flickered to life. Ethan's heart pounded as the video played. And then there it was, clear, undeniable proof. Proof that Mr. Peterson was innocent. Proof that someone had tried to frame him, and proof that this fight was far from over. Ethan Carter sat in the dimly lit office of Daniel Hayes, the Bar Association representative who had nearly derailed his defense of Mr. Peterson. The victory in court had been hard fought, but Ethan knew better than to celebrate just yet. Mr. Peterson was free, but the corruption that nearly destroyed him wasn't gone. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching Ethan close. You know they're not going to let this go, he said, his voice calm but heavy with warning. You embarrassed them, exposed their incompetence, and worse, you proved that the system can be challenged by someone outside of it. Ethan folded his arms. The system isn't the problem, the people who abuse it are. Daniel sighed. I see why you remind me of your brother. At the mention of James, Ethan stiffened. His brother had believed in the law, had nearly become a lawyer himself before the system turned against him. Now he was sitting in a prison cell for a crime he didn't commit. That's why I need your help, Ethan said. You saw what happened in that courtroom. Peterson was nearly destroyed because of corruption. My brother was too. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. You want me to help you take them down? Ethan nodded. I need access to legal documents, case files, anything that might prove James was framed. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. If I do this, Ethan, you need to understand something. This isn't a court case with a neat ending. If we dig too deep, we're going to find things that people will kill to keep buried. Ethan's jaw clenched. I don't care. Daniel studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. All right. But once we start, there's no going back. Spill it? The next day, Ethan met with his best friend, Liam, in a quiet coffee shop downtown. Liam was already waiting, a newspaper spread out in front of him. Page 4, Liam said as Ethan sat down. Ethan picked up the paper and scanned the page. His name was there, along with a headline that made his stomach twist. Teen courtroom prodigy or legal menace. Debate rages over unlicensed representation. They're spinning the story, Liam muttered, tapping the paper. Trying to paint you as a reckless kid who got lucky. Ethan clenched his fists. Let them talk. I have bigger problems. Liam raised an eyebrow. Like what? Ethan leaned forward. I'm going after James's case. Liam blinked. Wait, you mean reopening his case? Like officially? Yes, but not the legal way. Ethan glanced around before lowering his voice. I think his conviction was part of something bigger. The same kind of corruption that almost ruined Peterson. If we can prove that, we can take it apart. Liam let out a slow whistle. You're insane. Ethan smirked. You've mentioned that before. Liam sighed, rubbing his temples. All right. What's the plan? I need to talk to Henry Willis. Liam frowned. The guy who exposed Peterson's setup. Why him? Ethan tapped the table. Because he worked for the company that tried to frame Peterson. And guess what? That same company had connections to the firm that handled James's case. Liam leaned back, exhaling. Okay, so let's say we find something. What then? Are you going to represent James the way you did Peterson? Ethan hesitated. No. This time I need to do it the right way. Liam raised an eyebrow. Since when do you care about doing things the right way? Ethan gave a wry smile. Since I realized that breaking the rules only works once. If I want to take down the people who did this, I need the law on my side. Liam nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. The search for Henry Willis wasn't easy. He had disappeared after his testimony in court, likely fearing retaliation. After 2 days of dead ends, Ethan finally got a leap year in retaliation. After 2 days of dead ends, Ethan finally got a lead. An old address registered under a fake name. The building was a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Ethan and Liam parked across the street waiting. You sure he's still here? Liam asked, keeping his hood low. Ethan glanced at the motel's dimly lit windows. Only one way to find out. They crossed the street and knocked on the door to room 209. No answer. Ethan knocked again. Willis? It's Ethan Carter. I need to talk. A few seconds later, the door creaked open an inch. A bloodshot eye peered out. Go away, Willis muttered. Ethan held firm. I know you're scared, but if you really wanted to disappear, you wouldn't still be in town. Willis hesitated, then opened the door just enough for them to slip inside. The room was a mess. Clothes, papers, and empty whiskey bottles scattered everywhere. Willis slumped onto the bed, rubbing his face. What do you want, kid? Your help, Ethan said. Peterson's case wasn't the only one. My brother was set up too. Willis stiffened. You know something, Ethan pressed. Willis exhaled sharply. I don't know what you think I know, but if your brother's case was connected to Grant and his people, you're in deep. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Then tell me why. Willis hesitated, then stood and grabbed a manila folder from his duffel bag. He tossed it onto the table. Those are internal memos from my old firm, he muttered. They mention your brother's case. Ethan opened the folder, scanning the documents. His stomach twisted. James's name was there, linked to a financial case that had nothing to do with the assault charge he was convicted for. What is this? Ethan demanded. Willis sat back down, rubbing his hands over his face. James wasn't just some guy who got into a bar fight. He had information, something big, and the people who wanted it buried made sure he disappeared. Ethan's blood ran cold. James had always been an honest man, but had he been looking into something dangerous? Liam looked over his shoulder. This could mean his conviction wasn't just a mistake. It was a hit job. Ethan shut the folder, determination burning in his eyes. Then we're going to prove it. The next step was finding out exactly who wanted James gone. Ethan and Liam spent days digging through financial records, tracking connections between Grant's firm, and the Liam spent days digging through financial records, tracking connections between Grant's firm and the people involved in James's trial. What they found was worse than they had imagined. A trail of money led from a private corporation straight to the district attorney's office, the same office that had pushed for James's conviction. Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. They paid off the DA to make sure James went down. Liam nodded. And if they did that, then James was onto something bigger than we thought. Ethan exhaled, staring at the wall. They had uncovered enough to prove that James's conviction had been rigged. But if they wanted real justice, they needed someone powerful on their side. There was only one person who could help now: Daniel Hayes. Ethan stormed into Daniel's office the next morning, dropping the folder onto his desk. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Proof." Ethan stormed into Daniel's office the next morning, dropping the folder onto his desk. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Proof," Ethan said. James wasn't just wrongfully convicted. He was targeted. Daniel flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. "This," he muttered, shaking his head. "If this gets out, careers will be ruined." Ethan leaned forward. "Good," Daniel sighed, closing the folder. "I can take this to the right people. But you need to be careful. Whoever did this won't go down quietly." Ethan nodded. "I'm ready." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then finally said, "Then let's bring them down." And with that, the fight for James's freedom truly began. Ethan Carter sat in the dim glow of the streetlight outside Daniel Hayes's office, his mind racing. The documents he and Liam had uncovered proved what he had suspected all along. James had been framed, but proving it in court was an entirely different battle. Liam leaned against the car, arms crossed. "So what now? We've got the evidence, but that doesn't mean the system will listen." Ethan clenched his jaw. "That's why we need the right people on our side." Before Liam could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. A private number. He hesitated, then answered. "Carter." A woman's voice, crisp and professional, responded. "Mr. Carter, my name is Margaret Steele. I believe we have a common enemy." Ethan's heart pounded. "The same Margaret Steele who tried to discredit me in court." "I had my orders," she said smoothly. "But I also know when I've been backing the wrong side. Meet me at the Harborview Cafe in an hour." The line went dead. Liam whistled. That can't be good. Ethan stared at his phone. Or it's exactly what we need. Poor. Almira later. Ethan and Liam entered the quiet cafe near the waterfront. Margaret Steele was already waiting, dressed in a sleek black blazer, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She glanced up as they approached, and hair pulled into a tight bun. She glanced up as they approached, and gestured for them to sit. I'm risking a lot by being here, she said without preamble. Ethan folded his arms. Then why are you? She slid a folder across the table. Because I know when I'm on the losing side of history. And if Victor Grant goes down, a lot of people in high places will follow. Ethan opened the folder. Inside were documents, emails, financial records, and a report linking Grant's network to corrupt officials, including the district attorney who had pushed for James's conviction. This is... Ethan trailed off, scanning the pages. This could tear the case wide open. Margaret sipped her coffee. That's the idea. But be warned, if you use this, Grant's allies won't hesitate to retaliate. Ethan looked up. Why turn on them now? She leaned in. Because Grant's time is up. If I don't get ahead of this, I'll go down with him. Liam smirked. Self-preservation. Classic. Margaret didn't flinch. Call it what you want. Just make sure you win. The next morning, Ethan met with Daniel Hayes at a secure location. A quiet law office belonging to an old friend of Daniel's. He laid out Margaret's documents, and they were set at a secure location. A quiet law office belonging to an old friend of Daniel's. He laid out Margaret's documents. Daniel studied them carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, there was steel in his eyes. This isn't just about James, he said. This is about the entire justice system being manipulated by the highest bidder. Ethan nodded. Then let's burn it down. Daniel exhaled. We need to move carefully. If we rush this, they'll bury us before we get to trial. Liam raised an eyebrow. So what's the plan? Daniel leaned forward. We build a case so airtight that even the most corrupt judge can't ignore it. We use the media, public pressure, and legal channels, and when the time comes, we take it to court. Ethan clenched his fists. And James? Daniel met his gaze. If we do this right, your brother will walk free. Seta. Fascists. And James? Daniel met his gaze. If we do this right, your brother will walk free. News outlets picked up the story of corruption within the DA's office. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice for James and others like him. Ethan, Liam, and Daniel worked around the clock, refining their arguments and gathering witness statements that they all knew the fight wasn't over. Then, one night, everything changed. Ethan returned to his apartment to find the door ajar. His pulse quickened. He stepped inside cautiously. Papers were scattered. His laptop was missing. And on the kitchen table, a note written in bold block letters. Stop now or pay the price. His stomach twisted. Liam arrived moments later. Whoa, he muttered, taking in the wreckage. They're scared. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Good, but he knew they were running out of time. Stuff here. The next day, Ethan received an urgent call from Daniel. They're trying to silence Willis, Daniel said. He disappeared this morning. Ethan's heart pounded. What do you mean disappeared? His apartment was trashed. He's gone. Ethan's blood ran cold. If Willis had been taken, or worse, their case was in serious danger. We need to find him, Ethan said. Already moving. Liam grabbed his keys. Let's go. stuff here. But after hours of searching, Ethan got a lead. A security guard at a storage facility had seen Willis being forced into a black SUV near the docks. Ethan and Liam arrived just as the sun set. The warehouse loomed before them, its windows dark. Liam muttered, "This feels like a bad idea." Ethan ignored him and pushed open the door. Inside, Willis was tied to a chair, his face bruised, and standing over him was Victor Grant. Grant smirked. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, kid?" Ethan's blood boiled. "Let him go," Grant chuckled. "Or what? You gonna recite legal codes at me?" Ethan took a step forward. "You tried to destroy my brother. You framed him, bribed judges, and ruined lives. It's over, Grant." Grant's smirk didn't falter. "You think exposing me will change anything? The system is bigger than you, bigger than your brother. You can't win." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Watch me." Liam suddenly stepped forward. "We're not alone, Grant." Grant frowned. And then sirens. The warehouse doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, guns drawn. Daniel Hayes stepped inside, holding a warrant. "Victor Grant, you're under arrest." Grant's face twisted in fury. "You little..." The agents pulled him away. Ethan rushed to Willis, untying him. "You okay?" Willis groaned. "Been better." Ethan exhaled, the weight of everything crashing down on him. It was over. A week later, Ethan sat in the courthouse as the judge read the verdict. James Carter's conviction was overturned. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as James walked free. His brother turned to him. Tears boiled in Ethan's eyes as James walked free. His brother turned to him, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it." Ethan shook his head. "We did it. Oh, it's about knowing how to fight for it." The professor raised an eyebrow. "Interesting perspective." Ethan leaned back. "I've had some experience." Liam, sitting next to him, whispered, "Understatement of the year." Ethan smirked. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan Carter sat at his desk, staring at the stack of legal documents in front of him. His brother James was free, and Victor Grant was in custody. But something didn't sit right. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. Grant was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Liam entered the office, tossing a newspaper onto Ethan's desk. The headline read, "Grant's Web of Corruption. How deep does it go?" Liam folded his arms. "People are finally paying attention. But something tells me this isn't over." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's not. Grant might be in jail, but his network is still out there. And I just found something that proves it." Liam leaned forward. "What are we looking at?" Ethan pushed a folder across the desk. "Financial transactions. Offshore accounts linked to shell companies. These aren't just grants. They belong to the people pulling the strings." Liam's brow furrowed. "You're saying there's more?" Ethan nodded. "And I think I know where to start. Robert Peterson. Fersajang. Fersajang Fodorad." Robert Peterson was a name Ethan hadn't thought about in years. The former high-profile attorney had once been a pillar of the legal world, but then he had vanished. His name whispered in connection to the very corruption Ethan was investigating. Ethan pulled up an old case file. Pearson was Grant's lawyer years ago. If anyone knows the inner workings of this network, it's him. Liam frowned. "You think he'll talk?" Ethan smirked. "We're about to find out." Pearson Vard. Pearson Jamviwat. Thinning growled. Robert Peterson was no easy task. Officially he had retired. Unofficially he had disappeared. But Ethan had learned one thing from his years of fighting injustice. No one truly disappeared. After days of searching, he found him living under an alias in a small cabin deep in the woods of upstate New York. Liam parked the car outside the cabin. "Are we sure this guy isn't going to shoot us on sight?" Ethan smirked. "Only one way to find out." He knocked on the door. Silence. Then a voice. "Go away." Ethan didn't. "Mr. Peterson, I think we need to talk." The door cracked open, revealing an older man with sharp eyes and graying hair. He studied Ethan carefully. "And who are you?" Ethan met his gaze. "Someone who wants the truth." Ethan sighed. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Ethan stepped forward. "I think I do." After a long pause, Peterson opened the door. Ethan opened the door. Ethan. Outside, the cabin was modest, far from the luxury Peterson had once lived in. He gestured for them to sit. Liam leaned against the wall. "Nice place. What made you leave your old life behind?" Ethan chuckled. "Survival." Ethan placed the documents on the table. "We found these. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. You were part of this, weren't you?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "And I regret every second of it." Ethan pressed on. "Who's behind all of this?" Ethan hesitated. Then he said a name that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Charles Worthing." Liam's eyes widened. "Worthing? As in Judge Charles Worthing?" Ethan nodded. "He's been orchestrating this from the start. Grant was just his pawn." Ethan clenched his fists. "Why?" Ethan sighed. "Power. Money. Control." He built an entire legal empire designed to protect the guilty and silence the innocent. He made sure cases like your brother's never saw justice. Ethan's mind raced. "Then we bring him down." Ethan shook his head. "You don't understand. Worthing isn't just a judge. He has connections at every level. Law enforcement, politics, corporate executives. If you go after him, he'll come after you first." Ethan's expression hardened. "Let him." "What him?" "Why?" Mudding muting, Ethan and Liam met with Daniel Hayes. Ethan placed the folder on Daniel's desk. "We have our target." Daniel opened it and frowned. "Judge Worthing. That's ambitious." Liam smirked. "We don't do easy." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You're right. But if you want to take down a sitting judge, you need more than a financial paper trail. You need a witness." Ethan exhaled. "Ethan." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Will he testify?" Ethan hesitated. "He's scared. But I think I can convince him." Daniel tapped his fingers against the desk. "We need to move fast. Worthing has eyes everywhere. If he gets wind of this..." Liam finished the sentence. "We're dead." Ethan smirked. "Then let's make sure he doesn't." "Why?" "Destin sure he doesn't." It isn't easy to convince, but after hours of discussion he agreed to testify. The next step was to bring it to the DOJ. Daniel arranged a meeting with an old friend, FBI agent Rebecca Mills. As they sat in a secure office, Mills studied the documents. "This is big," she admitted, "but it's not enough for an indictment." Ethan leaned forward. "What do you need?" "A direct link. Proof that Worthing ordered illegal actions himself." Ethan exchanged a glance with Liam. "We might have that," Ethan said, "if we can get into Worthing's private records." Mills narrowed her eyes. "You're talking about breaking into a federal judge's files?" Ethan smirked. "Only if you say no." Mills sighed. "I didn't hear that. Vor talk if you did I." That night, Ethan and Liam found themselves outside Worthing's private office building. "This is insane," Liam whispered. Ethan grinned. "That's the spirit." They picked the lock and slipped inside. Liam watched the hallway while Ethan searched through Worthing's files. Minutes later, Ethan froze. "Liam," he whispered. Liam turned. "What?" Ethan held up a USB drive. "I think we just found what we need." Suddenly, footsteps. Liam grabbed Ethan. "We gotta go." They bolted for the back exit just as security entered. They barely made it out. Liam panted. "That was way too close." Ethan grinned. "But worth it." Hooray. 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 The next morning, they presented the USB drive to Mill. As she reviewed the files, she let out a low whistle. "This is it. This proves Worthing was involved in case tampering, bribery, and witness intimidation." Ethan smirked. "Then let's take him down." Hooray. And witty. As week later, Judge Charles Worthing was arrested. The headlines were everywhere. "Corrupt judge exposed. Years of cover-ups unraveled." As Ethan watched the news, James clapped him on the back. "You did it." Ethan smiled. "We did it." Liam raised a glass. "To burning the system down." Ethan smirked. "And rebuilding it right." Hooray. 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 Months later, Ethan Carter stood in front of a packed courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a lawyer. He glanced at his client, then at the judge. With a confident smile, he said, "Your Honor, I'm here to defend the truth." And this time, no one could stop him. The fight isn't over. Ethan Carter had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Judge Charles Worthing was arrested, and his corruption was exposed. But Ethan knew there were still powerful people out there who wanted to bury the truth. Worthing had been a key player, but not the mastermind. Someone else had orchestrated everything. Someone higher up. Someone still in the shadows. Sitting in his small office, Ethan pored over stacks of legal documents, notes and news articles. His brother, James, had been freed, but too many other innocent people were still trapped in a system designed to work against them. The more Ethan thought about it, the more he knew he couldn't stop now. Liam leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You look like you're planning something dangerous." Ethan smirked. "Aren't I always?" Liam sighed. "We took down a judge, but if you're thinking of going after the people above him, you better be ready. They won't play fair." "I know," Ethan said, flipping through another file. "That's why we need to find out who's really pulling the strings." Liam pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "There's someone who might have answers." "Greg Weston." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Weston, the private investigator who worked for Worthing." Liam nodded. "Yeah, he went into hiding after Worthing was arrested. But I heard he's been asking questions. If he's trying to save his own skin, he might be willing to talk." Ethan grabbed his coat. "Then let's go find him." Tonight, a meeting in the shadows. Tracking down Greg Weston wasn't easy. He had spent years working in the shadows. Tracking down Greg Weston wasn't easy. He had spent years working in the shadows, cleaning up legal messes for corrupt officials. Now that his biggest client was behind bars, he was a man on the run. After hours of searching, Ethan and Liam found him in a run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled like cheap whiskey and desperation. Weston sat in the corner, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. "You boys sure you want to be here?" Weston asked, exhaling smoke. Because once you start digging, there's no turning back. Ethan sat across from him. You worked for Worthing. Who else was involved? Weston chuckled. You think Worthing was the top of the food chain? He was just a pawn. The real power belongs to the people who never step inside a courtroom. Give me a name, Ethan demanded. Weston took a slow drag of his cigarette before leaning in. Victor Grant wasn't just a businessman. He was part of something bigger. A group. Lawyers, judges, cops, politicians. They call themselves the Syndicate. And trust me, you don't want to be on their bad side. Liam frowned. You're saying there's an organized group controlling the justice system? Weston nodded. And they won't stop until you're either dead or behind bars. Ethan clenched his jaw. Then we bring them down. Weston let out a dry laugh. You don't get it. These people don't leave loose ends. If you go after them, they'll come after you first. Ethan stared him down. Let them. Weston sighed, shaking his head. You Carter boys never learn. He reached into his bag and pulled out a flash drive. This has everything I've gathered on the Syndicate. But if you use it, you'll have a target on your back. Ethan took the drive, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Then we'd better move fast. One name stood out. Judge Harris. The same judge who had tried to railroad Ethan's brother. That bastard is still on the bench, Liam growled. Ethan's mind raced. We need to expose him. Before Liam could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Carter. A deep voice replied. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Drop this investigation, or you'll regret it. The line went dead. Liam's eyes darkened. That was them, wasn't it? Ethan nodded. Which means we're getting close. Suddenly glass shattered as a bullet ripped through the window. They dove to the ground. Liam cursed. Sniper. Ethan's heart pounded. We need to go now. They grabbed the flash drive and bolted out the back door, just as another shot rang out. Says Tadeus. Gamble. Ethan knew they couldn't go to the police. The Syndicate had people everywhere. Instead, he reached out to the one person he knew he could trust. Mr. Jenkins, the librarian who had helped him when he was fighting for James, agreed to meet in secret. As they sat in the dimly lit library, she adjusted her glasses. You boys sure know how to find trouble. Ethan placed the flash drive on the table. We need to get this to someone who can take the Syndicate down. Mrs. Jenkins frowned. I might know someone. A federal prosecutor who's been trying to crack this case for years. Ethan nodded. Then let's get to work. Says Tadeus. A final showdown. With the prosecutor's help, they arranged a sting operation. If the Syndicate thought they could silence Ethan, they were wrong. Judge Harris was scheduled to meet with several Syndicate members at a private club downtown. Ethan and Liam, wired with hidden microphones, walked in like they belonged. Judge Harris smirked as he saw them. I warned you to stay out of this, Carter. Ethan smiled. And I told you I don't scare easy. The room filled with laughter, until the doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed the club, arresting Harris and his associates. As they were led away, Judge Harris turned to Ethan, his face twisted in rage. You think this ends with me? There are more of us. Ethan smirked. Then we'll take them all down. Ethan and Liam, wired with hidden microphones, walked in like they belonged. Judge Harris arrested. The Syndicate exposed. The city erupted in shock. People finally saw the truth. Liam sat back, grinning. We actually did it. Ethan exhaled. For now. Mrs. Jenkins smiled. What's next, Mr. Carter? Ethan looked out the window, watching the city move forward. Now, I become the lawyer they never wanted me to be. And with that, Ethan Carter stepped into the next chapter of his life, ready to fight for justice, no matter what it took. The fight for truth continues. Emma Gray had achieved the impossible. She had exposed Victor Russo's empire, cleared her father's name, and seen justice served. But deep down she knew the fight wasn't over. The FBI's investigation into Russo's syndicate had revealed a deeper network of corruption, and even with Russo behind bars, dangerous players remained in the shadows. Sitting in her Uncle Matt's apartment, Emma flipped through a stack of articles about the case. Her father, Jason, had been home for 2 weeks now, and things were starting to return to normal, but a lingering sense of unease gnawed at her. "Still looking for trouble?" Matt asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. Emma shot him a look. "Trouble always seems to find me," Matt sighed. "Emma, you did what you set out to do. Your dad's free. Russo's in prison. Maybe it's time to let this go." Emma hesitated. She wanted to believe things were truly over, but something didn't feel right. The way Russo had smirked as he was led away, the warning in his voice. "This isn't over, kid." It stuck with her. "There's something bigger going on," she said finally. "Russo might be gone, but his connections aren't." Matt ran a hand through his hair. "Emma, you're 11. You should be worrying about school, not criminal conspiracies." She crossed her arms. "You keep saying that, but if I hadn't pushed, Dad would still be in prison." Matt had no argument for that. Emma turned back to her articles. "There's something missing," she murmured. Her Aunt Karen, who had been listening quietly, sat down beside her. "What are you looking for?" Emma frowned. Victor Russo was powerful, but he wasn't the mastermind. Someone had to be pulling the strings. Karen exchanged a glance with Matt. "Even if that's true, what can we do?" "The FBI is handling it." Emma bit her lip. "I don't trust them." Matt's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Emma hesitated before pulling out her father's old case file. She had gone through it dozens of times, but one thing had always bugged her. Agent Reyes, the FBI investigator who had helped bring Russo down, had been too eager to close the case. Agent Reyes knew too much too quickly, Emma said, almost like he was cleaning up a mess, not uncovering one. Matt stiffened. "You're saying Reyes is dirty?" Emma nodded. It wouldn't be the first time a law enforcement officer worked for the wrong side. Karen leaned forward. "And you think he's connected to whoever's left?" "I know he is." Matt exhaled. "Emma, if Reyes is dirty, you can't go after him alone." She looked at him, determined. "I don't plan to." Following the trail, the next day, Emma and Matt visited an old contact, Detective Hayes, a retired cop who had once worked with Emma's father. "I should have known you weren't done," Hayes said as he sipped his coffee. "What do you—" Emma pulled out a printout of financial records she had accessed through public databases. Reyes's bank accounts show multiple large deposits, offshore transfers, all within weeks of my dad's arrest. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That's suspicious." Matt crossed his arms. "Can you look into it?" Hayes nodded. "I still have friends in the department. I'll see what I can find." Emma smiled. "Thanks, Detective." As they left, Matt muttered, "I can't believe I'm helping you investigate a federal agent." Emma grinned. "I knew you'd come around." Folly note. That night Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something still didn't add up. Reyes's involvement was suspicious, but she needed something stronger, something undeniable. Her phone buzzed. Sitting up, she grabbed it and read the anonymous message. "Stay out of this, kid. You won't like what happens next." Emma's heart pounded. Someone was watching. She rushed to Matt's room, shaking him awake. "We need to leave," Matt groaned. "What?" She shoved the phone in his face. His eyes widened. "Pack a bag." They grabbed their essentials and slipped out of the apartment. Karen met them downstairs, her car already running. "Where are we going?" Emma asked. "To someone who can help," Karen replied, speeding into the night. "Tholina Withingo, an unexpected ally." Karen drove them to a small house outside the city. As they pulled up, a man stepped onto the porch, a tall, rugged figure with a serious expression. "Uncle Matt?" Emma whispered. "That's Agent Scott," Matt replied. "One of the few good guys left." Scott ushered them inside. "I've been waiting for you." Emma frowned. "You knew we were coming?" Scott nodded. "You stirred up a hornet's nest. Someone inside the bureau doesn't want you digging." Emma sat down. "Is it Reyes?" Scott hesitated. "I can't say for sure, but I've been tracking him. He's meeting with some shady people." Matt leaned forward. "Then we take him down." Scott smirked. "I like your style, but we need proof." Emma's mind raced. "Then let's get it." Setting the trap, Scott arranged for Emma and Matt to follow Reyes to a meeting the next night. They watched from a rooftop as Reyes entered a warehouse, greeting a man in a suit. They watched from a rooftop as Reyes entered a warehouse, greeting a man in a suit. Emma's breath caught. "That's Frank Mitchell, Russo's old enforcer." Matt tensed. "They're still working together." Scott snapped photos. "This is what we needed." But before they could leave, Reyes turned and locked eyes with them. "Run," Scott ordered. They bolted down the fire escape as gunshots rang out. Emma's heart pounded. "They know we're onto them." Scott led them to a waiting car and peeled out. "We need to move fast." Emma gritted her teeth. "Then let's finish this." Emma gritted her teeth. "Then let's finish this." Within hours, Reyes and Mitchell were arrested. The news exploded. Corrupt FBI agent exposed in criminal conspiracy. Emma watched the report, feeling relief wash over her. Matt nudged her. "You did it." She smiled. "We did it." Karen pulled her into a hug. "Your dad would be proud." Emma looked toward the future. She had uncovered the truth, saved her family and exposed corruption. But she knew there were always more battles ahead, and she was ready for them. The Chicago chase. Emma and her team arrived in Chicago by nightfall. The train station was massive, packed with travelers, but Emma wasn't here for sightseeing. She scanned the crowd while Matt checked his phone. He used his credit card at a coffee shop inside the station about an hour ago. Emma nodded. "Then he's still here." Jason pointed toward the departure board. "If he's trying to disappear, he'll take the first train out." Emma's eyes darted across the crowd until she saw a nervous-looking man in a gray hoodie gripping a duffel bag. "David Carter." She moved toward him, but before she could call his name, two men in dark suits appeared from the shadows. Apex agents. David saw them and ran. "Go!" Emma shouted, sprinting after him. Matt tackled one of the agents before he could reach for his weapon, while Jason blocked the other. Emma chased David through the crowded station. "David, stop!" David didn't listen. He bolted toward an exit, but Emma was faster. She grabbed his arm. "Let me go," he shouted, panic in his eyes. "I'm here to help you." Emma yelled back. David froze. "Who sent you?" "Sarah Green," Emma said quickly. "She said you had proof against Apex." David hesitated, but the sound of running footsteps made up his mind. "Come on." Emma pulled him toward the exit. Just as the Apex agents recovered and gave chase, the two of them darted into an alley, dodging pedestrians and weaving through traffic. Emma's heart pounded as headlights flashed in her eyes. A black SUV swerved into the alley, cutting them off. Doors opened. More agents stepped out. David paled. They found me. Emma scanned the street. No escape. A man stepped forward, his suit crisp, his presence commanding. "Miss Gray," he said smoothly, "you just don't know when to quit." Emma's stomach dropped. It was Charles Worthing, the same enforcer who had worked for Victor Rousseau. Except this time he wasn't working alone. This two of them darted into an alley, dodging pedestrians. "And I'll make this simple. Walk away and I'll pretend we never saw each other." Emma squared her shoulders. "Not happening." Charles chuckled. "I figured." He turned to his men. "Take them." Emma moved first. She grabbed David and shoved him behind her, dodging the first agent's grasp. She kicked another in the knee, sending him sprawling. David, still frozen in fear, barely reacted as Charles grabbed him by the collar. Emma lunged, but it was too late. Charles pulled out a gun and pressed it against David's head. "Enough." Emma stopped cold. Charles smirked. "Good girl. Now let's take a ride." "Now let's take a ride." The desperate escape. Emma and David were shoved into the SUV, hands tied behind their backs. As they drove through the city, Charles leaned back. "You're a persistent one, Emma." Emma glared. "You're going to kill him, aren't you?" Charles shrugged. "Not my call. Apex wants him gone." David whimpered. "Please, I can disappear." "I won't talk." Charles smirked. "That's cute." Emma's mind raced. Think. The driver spoke. "We're almost there." Emma's eyes flickered to the door handle. Unlocked. She looked at David. "When I say now, jump." David's eyes widened. "What?" Emma didn't repeat herself. Instead, she twisted sharply and kicked the driver's seat forward. The SUV swerved. "Now," she yelled. David threw himself out the door. Emma followed. They hit the pavement hard, rolling onto the street as tires screeched behind them. Gunshots rang out. Pedestrians screamed. Emma grabbed David and ran. They weaved through alleyways, cutting across streets, dodging traffic until they finally reached a small warehouse. Emma pushed David inside and slammed the door. They were safe for now. David gasped for breath. I can't believe that worked." Emma leaned against the wall, her heart still racing. "We need to move. Apex won't stop." David nodded, his face still pale. "Then let's end them." "That won't." "Face. Kivat." The final stand. Emma called Sarah. "We have David." Sarah exhaled. "Thank God." "Where are you?" Emma gave her an address. "But we don't have much time." Sarah was silent for a moment. "Then we drop everything. We go public." Emma nodded. "Let's do it." That night, Sarah released every piece of evidence David had collected. Bank records, emails, recordings, everything. Apex was exposed. The next morning, the FBI raided multiple locations. Arrests were made. Charles Worthing disappeared. But Emma knew this wasn't over, because as she scrolled through the latest news, another unknown number texted her. "You won't stop us all." Emma smirked. "Watch, the war isn't over." Emma's next move. Emma Gray sat in her father's small living room, the glow of the television screen casting shadows on her face. News anchors dissected the fallout of the Apex Group's exposure. High-ranking officials arrested, corporations scrambling to cover their tracks. and Charles Worthing missing without a trace. But despite the victory, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Her phone vibrated, another unknown number. "You exposed them, but you didn't stop them." Emma's fingers tightened around the phone. "Jason." Her father sat beside her, concern etched on his face. "Another threat?" Emma locked her screen. "More like a warning." "Matt." Her uncle crossed his arms. "Whoever's left in Apex is scared. That means we're winning." Emma wasn't convinced. "We didn't get Worthing," she said. "And if he's still out there, it means Apex isn't finished." Sarah Green, the journalist who had helped bring down Victor Russo and Apex, called. Emma put her on speaker. "Emma, I just got off the phone with my source in DC. Sarah said. The Apex group was just the tip of the iceberg. They were connected to something much bigger. Emma exchanged a glance with her father. "How much bigger?" Sarah hesitated. "Have you ever heard of Project Revenant?" Emma frowned. "No." Sarah sighed. "Because no one was supposed to hear about it." Jason leaned forward. "What is it?" Sarah's voice lowered. "It's a black-budget operation, a covert initiative Apex was funneling money into. We're talking billions." "Emma, it was designed to protect the people at the top, politicians, CEOs, high-ranking officials, by eliminating threats before they could even become problems." Emma's stomach dropped. "Are you saying they kill people?" Sarah hesitated. "Yes, and they were good at it." Silence filled the room. Matt exhaled. "So Apex wasn't just laundering money. They were funding assassinations." Sarah confirmed. "They've been operating for years, eliminating whistleblowers, activists, journalists, even judges who didn't play along." Emma's blood ran cold. She had spent months fighting to expose Apex, thinking they were at the top of the food chain. But they weren't. They were just a front. And the real enemy was still out there. The tyrant. A beast, a dangerous lead. Sarah's source had given her one name. A former Apex operative who had disappeared 2 years ago. Elias Monroe. He was a senior analyst. Sarah explained. He handled Apex's risk assessments, tracking people they considered threats. "If we can find him, he might have everything we need to expose Project Revenant." Emma nodded. "Where was he last seen?" Sarah hesitated. "That's the problem. The last record of Monroe places him in Mexico City, but my contact says he resurfaced in New Orleans." Jason sighed. "So we're chasing a ghost." Emma smirked. "We've done that before." Matt pulled out his phone. "We need to move fast. If Apex figures out we're looking for Monroe, they'll kill him before we can reach him." Emma exhaled. "Then let's get to New Orleans before they do." Then be here. The hunt begins. New Orleans was alive with neon lights, jazz music, and the hum of the city's nightlife. But Emma wasn't here for the tourist experience. She was hunting a man who didn't want to be found. Sarah had given her a location, a small dive bar on the outskirts of town, where Monroe had been spotted. Emma, Jason, and Matt entered, scanning the room. A bartender wiped down the counter, her sharp eyes flickering toward them. "Y'all ain't from around here." Emma placed a $100 bill on the bar. "We're looking for someone." "Elias Monroe." The bartender tensed. "Never heard of him." Matt smirked. "You hesitated." The bartender sighed, pocketing the bill. "Look, I don't know much, but if you're asking about Monroe, you're either the cops or worse." "We're neither," Emma assured. "We just need to talk to him." The bartender studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the back. "Last I heard, he stays in an old warehouse on Chartres Street. But be careful, Monroe doesn't trust anyone." Emma nodded. "Thanks." As they turned to leave, The bartender added. And if you're smart, you'll leave him alone. But Emma wasn't smart. She was determined. Right. Right, Emma won right. The warehouse on Chartres Street was abandoned. Its windows boarded up. Its brick walls covered in graffiti. Emma and her team moved cautiously. Matt tried the door locked. Jason motioned to an alley. There's a side entrance. They moved quietly, pressing against the wall. Emma knocked. Silence. She knocked again. Then a shotgun barrel slid through a hole in the door. Walk away. A voice growled. Emma held her hands up. Elias Monroe. The voice didn't answer. We're not Apex. She continued. We know about Project Revenant. And we know you do too. Silence. Then the door opened. A man stepped out, disheveled, gaunt, eyes filled with paranoia. But there was something else in them. Recognition. Who are you? Monroe demanded. Emma held out her hand. We're here to stop them. Monroe exhaled shakily. You can't. Emma's jaw tightened. We can try. Monroe studied her. Then without a word he stepped aside. Come in. The truth. About Project Revenant. Inside, Monroe's hideout was cluttered with papers, hard drives and maps covered in red string. He paced as he spoke. You don't understand, he mutters. Hideout was cluttered with papers, hard drives and maps covered in red string. He paced as he spoke. You don't understand, he muttered. Apex wasn't the real power. They were the face of the operation. Revenant is untouchable. Emma crossed her arms. No one is untouchable. Monroe stopped and looked at her. You think you won against Apex? He scoffed. You barely scratched the surface. Jason frowned. How big is this? Monroe pulled out a USB drive and held it up. This, he whispered, is the kill list. Emma's heart pounded. What do you mean? Monroe exhaled. It's every name Project Revenant has targeted. People they've already eliminated. And people they're planning to. He handed Emma the drive. She swallowed hard. At the bottom of the list, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her name. And her father's. Jason paled. They're coming for us. Monroe nodded grimly. And they won't stop until you're dead. The final decision. Emma gripped the drive tightly. She had exposed the Dominion. She had brought down Apex. But this was bigger than she had ever imagined. She looked at her father, then at Monroe. What do we do? Monroe hesitated. Then he said two words that changed everything. We burn them. Emma's pulse quickened. How? Monroe motioned to a pile of files. Revenant operates in the shadows. If we pull them into the light, they'll collapse. Sarah's voice crackled through Emma's phone. I'm in. We expose everything. Jason exhaled. They'll come for us. Emma smirked. Let them. Matt grinned. Then let's start a war. Emma plugged the USB into her laptop. And with one click, she set the world on fire. The war wasn't over. But it was just beginning. No way out. Emma's last stand. The news spread like wildfire. The release of the Project Revenant files shook the country, sending shockwaves through the highest levels of power. Names were exposed. Politicians, CEOs, law enforcement officers, people who had ordered assassinations, covered up crimes, and used Apex as their personal enforcers. Within hours, several investigations were announced. Some officials resigned. Others went into hiding. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. And Emma Gray knew that better than anyone. Because they were coming for her. For her. Sarah Green, the journalist, had leaked the files to every major outlet. And the country was in chaos. But exposing the truth had made them targets. 3 days after the story broke, Emma's safe house in Baton Rouge was compromised. A drone spotted Matt while he was out getting supplies. An hour later, black SUVs rolled onto their street. "They found us," Matt shouted as he burst into the house. Emma looked up from her laptop. "How many?" "4 cars, heavily armed," Matt said, grabbing his pistol. "They're moving in fast." Jason cursed under his breath. "We need to go." But Monroe didn't move. He stood by the window, watching the SUVs with dead eyes. It's too late, and he was right. The front door exploded inward as tactical agents poured in. For her escape, Emma dove behind the couch as bullets shredded through the walls. Jason pulled her down, shielding her as Matt fired back, dropping one of the masked operatives. "We're surrounded," Matt yelled. Emma's mind raced. "We need an exit." She spotted a small ventilation shaft behind a shelf. "There," she shouted. Jason helped her move the shelf, exposing the vent. "Go." One by one, they squeezed through, crawling into the narrow tunnel. Behind them, the house shook as grenades detonated. They emerged in an alley, gasping for air. But as soon as they stepped into the open, a black SUV screeched to a stop. A figure stepped out. Charles Worthing. His dark suit was spotless, his expression calm, controlled. Emma's blood ran cold. Worthing smirked. "You've been a real problem, Miss Gray." Jason stepped in front of her, gun raised. "Stay back." Worthing raised his hands mockingly. "Relax, Mr. Gray. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead." Emma clenched her fists. "What do you want?" Worthing smiled. "A conversation." "Huts." A deal with the devil inside the SUV." Emma sat across from Worthing. The air was thick with tension. Jason and Matt refused to come inside, waiting outside with guns drawn. But Emma knew this was her fight. Worthing poured himself a drink. "You think you've won?" Emma's glare was ice cold. "I think I've exposed you." Worthing chuckled. "Exposed? Maybe. But dismantled? No." He took a slow sip. "You have no idea what you've started." Emma crossed her arms. "Then enlighten me." Worthing leaned forward. "You think Revenant is just some secret kill squad? No, we're the foundation of this country, the real power. Governments rise and fall because of us." Emma's jaw tightened. "You kill people to protect criminals." Worthing smirked. "We kill people to protect order." Emma's heart pounded. "So what now? You kill me?" Worthing tilted his head. "Not necessarily." He slid a folder across the table. Emma opened it. Inside were bank records. Money being funneled into offshore accounts. But the names attached made her breath hitch. Sarah Green, Matt Peterson, Detective Reyes. All of them framed for crimes they didn't commit. Emma's hands clenched into fists. "You set them up." Worthing's smile was chilling. "I'm giving you a choice. You disappear. You stop this crusade. And in return, your friends walk free." Emma stared at him. "Or," Worthing continued, "you keep fighting and they go down as traitors. Foesel." The choice. Emma walked back to Jason and Matt, her stomach in knots. She told them everything. Matt was furious. "We can't let them do this." Jason placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "What do you want to do?" Emma's mind was spinning. If she backed down, Worthing would win. But if she kept fighting, the people she cared about would suffer. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Don't stop, no matter what." Emma took a deep breath. Then she made her decision. Foesate. The final move. Instead of running, Emma went on the offensive. That night, she contacted every journalist, hacker and whistleblower she knew. Within hours, Sarah's team released a second wave of files. This time, it wasn't just Revenant, it was the entire power structure. Secret meetings, illegal deals, military coups staged by American elites. It was everything. And it wasn't anonymous. Emma Gray stood in front of a camera, She looked directly into the lens, and she told the world the truth. Toa said. The aftermath. The backlash was immediate. Protests erupted. Arrests followed. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Revenant. The president was forced to resign, and Worthing. He vanished. Some said he fled the country. Others said he was eliminated by the very people he served. Emma didn't care, because the fight was over, and she had won. Toa said. 1 year later, Emma stood outside Harvard Law School. A fresh start, a new mission. Jason had opened a legal firm for whistleblowers. Matt had returned to private investigation. And Sarah, she won the Pulitzer Prize for exposing Revenant. As for Emma, she wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter, and no matter what came next, she was ready. The story of Emma Gray teaches us a powerful lesson about resilience, truth, and the cost of standing up for what is right. In life, we are often faced with moments where we must choose between comfort and courage. Emma chose courage, even when it meant risking everything. She reminds us that justice does not come easily. It requires sacrifice, persistence, and an unwavering belief in the truth. For those of us who have lived through decades of change, we know that corruption and injustice are not new. But what this story shows is that one person can make a difference, even when the system seems too powerful, even when the odds seem impossible. The truth has a way of finding its way to the light. Emma's journey is a testament to the idea that doing the right thing is rarely the easy path, but it is the only path that leads to real change. As we reflect on our own lives, let us remember that our voices matter, our actions have consequences, and the fight for truth and justice is never in vain, no matter how long it takes.